Góðan daginn. Hi and welcome back to Icelandic for Foreigners. In this episode, we're going to be talking about impersonal verbs. Let's get right into it. Now, we call them impersonal verbs because the subject of sentences that use these verbs are not in nominative. If you remember from my cases video, we learned that basically always the subject of your sentence is going to be in the nominative case, and the objects are going to be in accusative, dative, and genitive. But with impersonal verbs, the subject is in accusative or dative instead of nominative, and the verb is always in the third person form. That's the han, hun, or thad form. I should clarify, it's in the third person singular form, which is the han, hun, and thad form. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. We're going to start by looking at some accusative impersonal verbs, which means that the subject of the sentence is going to be in accusative, either the pronoun or the noun. The verbs we're going to look at are langa, vanta, dreyma, klæja, and gruna. So let's start with langa, which is a very common way to express that you want something in Icelandic. People use this word all the time. So the third person singular forms that we need are langar and langaði. And we're going to use this form no matter what our subject is, whether it's ég or þú or við or þið, we're always going to use the third person singular conjugation. So here's an example. Mig langar að fara í partíið means I want to go to the party. So notice here that even though I is the subject in English, in Icelandic we're going to use the accusative pronoun mig instead of ég. Then we have langar, which is the third person singular conjugation, and then the rest of the sentence. So I guess the direct translation maybe to English would be me wants to go to the party, which of course sounds weird in English, but this is how you say it in Icelandic. Here's another example. Hana langaði til þess, which means she wanted to do it. And again here, even though she is the subject in English, we're going to use the accusative pronoun in Icelandic, and the third person singular, in this case past tense, of langa. Here's one more. Okkur langar í pizza og kók, which means we want pizza and coke. So notice here that we use okkur, which is the accusative form for we, and then we still use langar, which is the third person. And then if you want to use langar to express that you want something in particular, you use the preposition í, followed by the accusative. I should point out real quick that with langa, a lot of Icelanders will say mér langar. They'll use the dative pronoun instead of the accusative pronoun. So I just want to tell you that from a prescriptivist point of view, that's incorrect. You're supposed to use the accusative pronoun, but a lot of Icelanders say it this way. Let's look at að vanta, which means to need, or that you're lacking something. So the third person forms that we need are vantar and vantaði. So in the sentence, hann vantar grímu, means he needs a mask. Now don't be fooled here. We have hann, which is also the nominative form for he, but it's also the accusative form. And here we're using the accusative form. And then gríma, we're also using the accusative form. So really we have two accusative nouns in this sentence, and one of them is acting like the subject. We can know that it's hann is the subject because of the context and because of the order. Here's another sentence. Ólaf vantaði peningana means Ólafur needed the money. Ólafur is the nominative form, and Ólaf is the accusative form. Hvað vantar just means what's missing, because vanta, it can mean to need something or that you're lacking something or that you're missing something. And with vanta, again, just like langa, some Icelanders will say mér vantar. But again, from a prescriptivist point of view, that's not correct. You should use accusative. But a lot of people say it that way. All right, a couple of other examples of accusative impersonal verbs are að dreyma, to dream, klæja, to itch, and gruna, to suspect. So here are some examples. Mig dreymdi mjög skrítinn draum means I had a very strange dream. Þá klæjar í fæturna means their feet itch. And notice here we're using the accusative form of þeir, which is þá. And hana grunar að hann hafi farið fram hjá sér means she suspects that he has cheated on her. All right, let's move on to some dative impersonal verbs. We're going to look at finnast, þykja, leiðast, takast, and líða. So let's talk about finnast, which is quite complicated to use, but it's very, very common. The third person forms that we need are finnst and funst. And note that we have the st on the end. That means that this is a middle voice verb, and we're always going to use the middle voice when we're meaning it in this way. Don't worry too much about conjugating the middle voice for the sake of this video, because I'm giving you the two forms that you need right here. So let's look at some examples. And these sentences have very strange structures that you'll just have to kind of learn and pick up on as you go. Mér finnst íslenskan erfið. This means, I think Icelandic is difficult. And there are a lot of things going on in this sentence, so let's break it down. First, we have mér, which is the dative form for I. Then we have finnst, which is the third person singular for finnast. Then we have íslenskan, which is the nominative form for Icelandic. And then we have erfið, which is the nominative form of the adjective. So this is a very strange sentence, and it's pretty unique in Icelandic. There aren't a lot of other things that behave this way in Icelandic. But basically, what you could think of this as meaning is, to me, it is found that Icelandic is difficult. My recommendation to you is to memorize this sentence and use it as a pattern to create other sentences like it, because this kind of sentence is used a lot in Icelandic with að finnast. Here's another example that's very similar. Okkur finnst þeir skemmtilegir, which means we think they are fun. So again, we have dative okkur. Then we have finnst and þeir, which is the nominative form for they, and skemmtilegir, which is the nominative form of the adjective. And notice here that even though we have a nominative pronoun here, þeir, that doesn't change finnst. We always use the third person singular, no matter what. Let's look at another example here, a little bit more complex. Krökkunum fannst hún tala of hratt, which means the kids thought she talked too fast. So a lot of things going on in this sentence. Let's break it down. Krökkunum is the dative form for the kids. Then we have fannst, which is the past tense, third person singular form of finnast. Then we have hún, which is the nominative form for she, just like we saw above. Then we have tala, which is the infinitive form. And then ofrat, which is our adverb. So again, this structure is very complicated. So I would recommend memorizing this sentence and using it as a pattern, because a lot of people will say sentences like this too. Let's look at a couple more examples with finnast. Mér finnst gaman að skokka means I like jogging. Icelanders will use sentences like this a lot. Mér finnst gaman að to mean I think it's enjoyable to do something. Mér finnst eins og ég sé að klikkast, which means I feel like I'm going crazy. You'll often hear eins og after finnst to mean I feel like. And mér finnst að ég ætti að skrifa bók means I think I should write a book. So finnast is pretty complicated, and maybe I should just make a separate video just talking about finnast. But if you rely on the sentences that I've given in this video, they will give you a good pattern for creating sentences with finnast. Let's talk about þykja, which has a very similar meaning to finnast, to mean that you think or feel a certain way about something, but it's used a little bit more in set phrases. So the forms that we need are þykir and þótti. So here's an example. Mér þykir leitt að þurfa að segja þér þetta, which means I'm sorry to have to tell you this. So in this case, we have dative mér and then þykir, and then an adjective, leitt, which means I think it's sad that. And that's often how you'll express the concept of I'm sorry in Icelandic. Davidi þykir mjög vænt hana. This means David really likes her. Davidi is the dative form of David. And the last one is okkur þótti það líklegt, which means we thought it was likely. All right, let's look at a couple other examples of dative impersonal verbs briefly. We have leiðast, which means to get bored, takast, which means to manage or succeed at something, and líða, which means to feel. So we have af hverju leiðist þér svo mikið í tíma, which means why do you get so bored in class? Ég vona að þér takist að klára verkefnið, which means I hope you manage to finish the assignment. Notice here that we're using the subjunctive form of takast. We haven't really talked about using the subjunctive in this video or the past participle, but we'll still need to use those even with impersonal verbs if the occasion requires it. In this case, ég vona is what triggers it. So just remember that you'll still need to use those forms, and you'll just use the third person singular form for these impersonal verbs. The last example is hvernig líður ykkur, which means how do you feel? All right, that's what I have for this video. I know it's some complicated stuff, so as always, please feel free to leave comments or questions below. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more. Bless, bless.